All right. Well, good morning. Yeah, it is time to start. Good morning. Good to see everybody. Glad that you're here. Hope that you just this past week is pretty as nice as it was, even though it rained, I know. But anyway, hope that you cut some extra firewood because you're gonna need it this week. So it's supposed to be pretty cold this week, and the possibility of some white stuff falling out in the sky about the middle of the week. And so I hope that you have a good week. Go buy your bread yesterday, maybe tomorrow, so you'll have it. All the news has to do is say that there's a shortage of something. And it becomes true, right? Shortage of eggs. Now, I understand there's correlation between what's going on with bird flu, but all they have to do is holler. Eggs are $9 a dozen. Terrible. But anyway, all right. Well, we're going to begin a new study this morning, and you'll need the Bible. We'll talk about things. We're talking about these things we believe. And in many ways, it's very basic. It's not this series. I've mapped it out, but at the same time, too, I'm leaving some leeway from the standpoint of some things that maybe you will suggest. We're doing this study for several reasons. First of all, it was asked that I do it, and so I'm glad to do it from that standpoint. Second of all, I think it's important that we review the fundamentals, and that's what we're going to talk about. You know, today is the existence of God. Next Sunday is the inspiration of the Bible. But then we'll get a little further in, a little more detailed on certain doctrine, why we believe, or we believe baptism is necessary for salvation. We believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. We believe that there is a real heaven and there is a real hell, and just basics, yes. But we're going to get a little bit deeper than the average, just quick once over in some of these lessons. But I also wanted to do this study because I think it's important that we understand the fundamentals. And that's not to say that you don't. But how often do you have to go over them, be reminded of how important they are? I mean, it's sort of like I enjoy thoroughly sports, but even the professionals through the week go through the fundamentals of how to block or how to catch and how to throw and how to run and all the fundamentals of whatever the sport is. They go through those fundamentals in order to be sure that they're sharp on just the basics, because if we have just the basics, then we have really the foundation of the house we're able to build on. And so it's important that we have those fundamentals. And I also think, too, that from time to time, I don't know about you, but it is good for me to go back through kind of the basics, just for the simple reason that it's not that I don't know them, but it is good to go back through them and to have my faith reaffirmed. This is why I believe what I believe. This is the way I believe them. And so, therefore, this is what I have. And so, from that standpoint, those are some of the reasons that I want to do this study. But this morning, we are looking at the very basic foundation of God exists. This we believe, God exists. This is fundamental to our faith. And we would all say, I mean, in a heartbeat, every one of us would say, preacher, we already believe that or we wouldn't be here. And that's right. But one of the things that we know is that in the world, the number of folks that are more skeptic than anything is rising. Now, you have the atheist. Let's define terms for just a second. You have the atheist that believes and says there is no God. You have the agnostic that says, well, I don't know. Remember, Gnosis, we talked a little bit about it last week. Knowledge, Gnosis, the agnostic. When you put a lot of times in front of a word, it's what's called a prohibitive, and it's a negative. And so agnostic, I don't know. So you have the atheist that says there is no God. The agnostic says, don't know. The skeptic that says, well, I'm unsure. I'd like to be sure. Today we have, I think, we have a rise truly in atheism and agnostics, but I think we have really more of a rise in, say, the layperson, the common layperson, in skepticism. We're skeptical. We're skeptical of people. We're skeptical of religion. We're skeptical of are these things that you teach out of the Bible, are they true? And so when we deal with those terms, we have to understand what we're dealing with. And as the number of folks that are more skeptical with regards to religion, organized religion. One of the things, Suzanne and I was talking about this the other day, I had done some research back a few months ago on it, but a song came up on the radio and I said, this is what this is about. And one of the things that is happening amongst, say, 20 and 30-year-olds is the idea of, I'm religious, but I'm not religious. You might say, huh? In other words, they believe God, but they don't believe in organized religion. They don't believe in going to church. And for them, just saying a prayer or singing a song that has religious connotations, that's going to church. Different than what we believe, different than what the Bible teaches, but that's a growing trend right now amongst the 20 and 30-year-olds. It's an interesting study. Sometimes if you want to really delve into it, just get on the internet and just start Googling, and you'll find some of those things. But we need to understand that for our faith, we say there's a God. Matter of fact, if you go back to the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 2, Daniel makes this statement when he is interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Here's his statement: there is a God. And he's not talking about little g either. He's talking about God in heaven. There is a God in heaven. Brother Otis Gatewood, back in the 60s, I want to say, Brother Gatewood was one of the first preachers that we had of our beliefs that was behind the Iron Curtain at the time in Russia. And Brother Gatewood wrote a very simplistic book entitled There Is God. And his whole premise was to prove in a very simple way that God exists. Well, we need that. And of course, to whom he had been preaching for years, to the Russian folks behind the Iron Curtain, the folks that didn't believe in God, didn't believe in the existence of God. Those things are important and vital. We must believe that there is a God. But yet here's the problem. The problem is that we have, in many ways, no smoking gun. In other words, if you were arrested tomorrow, thrown into jail, and tried for a case of murder, and yet they don't have the gun, or maybe better yet, they don't have the body. Very hard for them to get a case against you. They can't. They can build a case. It's called a prima facie case. And they can build that against you because there's enough evidence to prove. Now, here's our problem. We believe God. Where's God? God's not going to stand up in that pulpit in a few minutes. He's not going to come in the back door. He's not going to come in your house tomorrow as such. Now, we would say, well, you're preacher, Paul, you're going to represent God in presenting his word in the pulpit in just a few minutes. That's right. But I'm not God. There's going to be several people walk through that back door that are Christians, followers of God, trying to do the best that they can in their life. You're still not God. So what we have to do is we have to build a case that proves that there is that which is higher and mightier than we. That is beyond, if you will, human reproduction and human production. To the point where we say there has to be some higher being. That's our thesis today. Now, we go to the Bible then to prove God. Not the existence of God, but to prove who God is, what he's like. So you see how it all builds on one another? We've got to prove God exists. Then, once we've proved God exists, as we will here in just a few minutes, then we have to prove that, well, who is this God? Because so today all we're trying to find out is there a higher being? The answer is yes, in our way of thinking. Well, what has he told us about himself? Because, and I want you to remember this, and we'll talk more about this next week, is when we get to the Bible and we look at the Bible, we have to understand what the Bible is. I don't think a lot of folks, I'm not saying you all, but a lot of folks in the world, I don't think understand what the Bible is. The Bible is God's revelation of himself to mankind. And we'll talk about that next week. So you hold on to that thought. Let that kind of simmer in your head, and we'll deal with that next week. What about, is there a God? Well, yes. Well, what are the arguments that have been used through the years? As they're called in Christian evidences, the apologists. When Paul said that he was set for a defense of the gospel, he's called an apologist. An apologia actually is the word there, defense. An apologist is one that stands for the truth, stands for God. But what are some of the arguments that's used? Well, the first one is called the ontological argument. I'm just going to throw out the big names, but I'm going to explain. This is probably the one that, in my opinion, is the least feasible argument that's made by the apologists as far as the existence of God. Here's the argument of the ontological argument. The ontological argument is simply this. I believe that God exists, and therefore he exists. That's an oversimplification, but that's kind of it. I believe that God exists, therefore he exists. Well, I think probably you see the problem with that without having given that much thought. Well, I can say anything exists. That doesn't mean that it exists. That doesn't mean that it's true. And you'd be right. That's the problem with the argument. That argument was built on by Thomas Anselm in the late 1700s. That's what he came out with. And so that's where usually the apologists begin. I believe that God exists because I believe that he does. Great. Well, what other arguments? Let's move on. Let's move on to something that is more understandable. There's the cosmological argument. Cosmological argument, you probably have figured out, is the idea there's a cause. If there's an effect, there's got to be a cause. If there's if you will, a result, there had to be a cause. In other words, if you were right now, if you were to scream out, ouch, we would figure that somebody elbowed you, somebody pinched you, or a mouse ran up your leg, right? It's church. You gotta have church mice. We don't have any, by the way, that we know of right now. But you see what I'm saying? There was an end result. There was an effect. So there had to be a cause for the effect. By the way, you ever want a good church mouse story? Got one for you. Suzanne and I got one we can tell you. It didn't really happen to us. Well, it happened to Suzanne. The first congregation I was ever working for, I knew that there was a mouse in the building because one Sunday when I was preaching, I saw it. And the individual cleaning the building was also an elder at the church. This is a small congregation. And he said, you don't know what you're talking about. And a few weeks later, I was not preaching. Somebody else was preaching. I was sitting by Suzanne. And Sunday night, our little visitor made his way down the side wall, up in front of the stage, and we had chairs that kind of sat in the amen section. Nobody sat in them, but we had chairs, and he went and played over there. And nobody heard a word. And after the service was over, I went up to his owner. I said, "Do you believe me now?" He said, "Yep." But the funny part of the story is that Suzanne was, like I say, sitting beside me, and Suzanne all of a sudden put the death grip on my arm. What in the world? That mouse, he's by my foot. Now, like I say, nobody heard what the preacher said that night. I was preaching. But anyway, I said,
Everybody would have been hearing me.
yeah. Well, the reality of it was, I said, "No, he's not." "Yes, he is. He got it." I said, "He's up there. He's up there on those chairs." She said, "Yeah." What had happened was the baby's bottle, about 4 rows back, the baby had dropped the bottle, had rolled it, hit her foot. There was a fact, therefore there was a cause. But you see the point. Okay. Well, having said that, then, let's look at a couple of passages. Let's look at Exodus chapter 20. This is part of the Ten Commandments. You know, I'm sure, know it well. But in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 11 is where we're going to look. Remember, in verse 8, he says, "Remember the Sabbath day, he being God. Keep it holy." And he talked about 6 days you'll labor, you'll do your work. The seventh day is the Sabbath that you're going to rest. And he says, kind of an explanation then for all of that is verse 11. "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Notice what he said. He said, how do you explain this world? How do you explain this world? You explain this world by, at least for us Christians, God. In 6 days, Moses said, God created the world. The effect is here. It's us. It's the world. It's planet Earth. The cause, it had to come from somewhere. It's God. And so we find, if you will, a little bit further information about that. Now turn to Acts 17. This gives us even a little bit more information. In Acts 17, this is Paul on Mars Hill. Paul, remember on Mars Hill, that's that story or that sermon where Paul stands up and tells the folks, y'all are superstitious, you got all kinds of gods, you got even one to an unknown God. He says, that's the one I'm going to preach. That's that context. And in Acts chapter 17, verse 24, Paul in this sermon says, God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is worship with men's hands as though he need anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And then verse 26 is kind of interesting. He has made of one blood. Now, the idea of one blood literally means of one male. And this makes sense, doesn't it? Adam. He has made of one male every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. So forth and so on. Sense doesn't need it. But you get what Paul says. Paul says, God made the world. God is the cause of this effect. And it makes sense, doesn't it? Now, a lot of folks have problems with that. Here's why. Because you put nothing with nothing, you end up with nothing. But what we say is that from nothing came something. How do you explain this earth? How do you explain this world? Look for just a second. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 4. Now, I promise you, on some of these lessons, we'll have a lot of turning back and forth, and some I'll try to pick just one text, and so you won't have so much turning. But Hebrews chapter 3, verse 4 is such a simplistic verse that even I can understand it. And if I can understand it, anybody else can. It makes sense. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 4. What does the Hebrew writer says? For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. Now that makes sense, doesn't it? You have a house, you have a cause, or you have an effect. So you have to have a cause. What's the cause? Well, builders built it. Somebody planned it. Somebody drew up the plans. Somebody approved the plans. Somebody put the money in on it. All causes. The effect, the house. Makes sense. Why is there water running through my front yard now? It's because when they built the wall, they didn't build it where they're supposed to build it. Probably going to end up in a fight over that wall. But they're dumping water on our front yard. And so I rode here. No. But even the project manager told me not built right. So we'll fix it. We'll get fixed. But you see, there was an effect, so there was a cause behind it. Now the cause is that there's water running from that hill next door, not on the property that they're building on, but next door off that hill, running onto their hill, which is running onto, because water goes where least resistance, yeah, downhill. And so anyway, but there's a cause and there's effect. So we look at the universe, we look at the stars, we look at the sky. You say, man, how'd that come from? The atheist tells us what? It just happened. The atheist has to believe something. He doesn't have to, you say. He really does. That's the nature of which God created us. He created us as curious people. Not weird curious, but curious from the standpoint of wanting to know. And the atheist wants to know and wants to explain how he got here. And he says, well, I don't believe God exists, so it just happened. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you the odds, because I don't know the odds, and I really couldn't find them this week. I've got them somewhere. But the odd, Kenny Barfield, Kenny was a teacher at Mars Hill Bible School. He was like a Bible teacher, and I forgot, math or science. I had a roommate that actually had him for a teacher in high school. But Kenny wrote a book, and I was pleasure to meet Kenny one time. He has long since passed away. But he wrote a book on what the odds are. I don't have the book, never had the book. But what are the odds that this world just came into existence? And the odds are astronomical. I mean, you got a better chance of winning the lottery 10 times without even playing it than this world just happening. It just can't be. Well, the Hebrew writer says, every house is built has a building and it does. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is God. Now we know this, and it's kind of interesting because through the years in religion, we've often pointed at science and said science is the enemy of Christianity. Science really helps us. Because one of those great laws of science says this: everything is running down. All energy is running down, matter is running down, it's getting weaker, it's getting less. Right? Now, isn't that an interesting thought? That the scientists in their wonderful knowledge have come up with that law? Think about it. If it's running down, it had to have a beginning point. I got an answer for them. They don't have an answer. I got an answer. God. That's their beginning point. And so we see that this universe, we might say, well, it was running down. But it had to have a cause. It had to have a starting point. Well, gosh. Well, next argument, anything anybody wants to say? I don't like doing all the talking. My wife says I do. Well, the next argument that's used is what's called the teleological argument. So we've had the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, and the teleological. teleological argument. It just simply means the end. Teleos, the end. Well, what does that mean? When we look at, we're going to look at man. When we look at man, we see great design. Imagine, if you will, well, let's do this. Imagine, if you will, Christy, don't sit in that seat because we're going to have an explosion over the quarry. Right behind you is the mark of where we're glad you weren't sitting. Now, imagine that there's going to be, usually, what is Wednesday? Like, those of us that live right close, we get to feel the rumble. It's always interesting because you feel the rumble, and the rumble is not just the explosion, but it's everything going back. You know, it expands and it goes back, and you feel that rumble. But anyway, imagine that we're wanting to build a road. And so we go over to the quarry and we say, okay, 5 miles over here, we want a new road. Or better yet, just right over here, they're having to build a road, build these houses on over by the house. We want an explosion over the quarry, but we want a road over here. And so if you on Wednesday will have that explosion at 12 noon and let all the rocks fall over there in order to establish that road, what are the odds? Have no idea. Other than this, ain't gonna happen. But supposedly, over there by the house, man bought the property. He talked to several people that supposedly knew, although I'm beginning to wonder. And they came up with a plan. And that plan was then, of course, had to be approved by Metro, and Metro has made them make revisions to that plan, but nevertheless, as they planned that idea, that they first came in there and they laid, Jim would probably know, but they laid stone that was huge. And then they kind of, because through construction, you lay something down, then you have to tear it up in order to lay it down again. It's sort of like, you always notice, you want to know where works, water works and things like that. You want to know where their next project's going to be. Just follow the paving trucks, and wherever there's a new road, they're going to dig it up next week. That's always been the case, hasn't it? Well, you see, back over here, they put the large on, and then they put the smaller on in order to make a road. They came with thought. They didn't just go in there and just put that gravel right down the middle of that property. Oh no, because the road's going to be right here, so we need to put the gravel right here. It didn't just happen. Design. The design argument is simply this: the design demands a designer. Well, what is design? I ran across, I'm going to read something too, but I ran across something that I thought was interesting, and see if I can explain it. And I just wrote it down, so maybe I can. But it's talking about this universe. They said when we look into the sky on a starry night, we may see as many as 3,000 stars just with our eyes. But with a small telescope, we may see 100,000 stars. The universe has 25 sextillion stars. That's a 25 with 21 zeros after it. That's how many stars in the universe. There's, according to scientists, 1 billion galaxies. Each galaxy is said to have 100 billion stars. So light travels at 186,000 miles per hour and is 6 trillion miles in a year, is equal to 1 light year. Now, I don't expect, we're not going to have a test on that, okay? I don't even remember it, I wrote it down. But it's just to give you the idea of how fast everything moves and how big everything is. You know, we think, well, those stars, I can just reach up and touch them. And there's, we get on a good, clear summer night when we're out in the yard and we're just looking up at the stars and we're amazed and we see all of these stars. The Milky Way, the galaxy in which our own Earth is located, is 100,000 light years across. Now, a light year is what? Well, it's about 6 trillion miles. So in other words, in 100,000 light years, you can go across the Milky Way. Spaceships at the speed of light then would take 100,000 years to go across our galaxy. Now here's the question. Did that just happen? The evolutionist says that it does, and that it did, rather. The Christian says, I don't like those odds. The Bible proclaims where it came from. Look in Psalm 19, verse 1. Psalm 19, verse 1. The psalmist, believed to be David, said, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utter speech, and night reveals knowledge. There's no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Notice what he says in verse 1. Heavens declare the glory of God. How did all of that order come into order? It had to have, at least in my mind, it had to have a great designer that had tremendous knowledge and ability. And I still wonder who that is. Now, admittedly, you can go through these arguments and you can say, well, that doesn't lead me to God. And that's right. It leads you to a higher being other than man and other than chance. The Bible's going to lead us to God. Here's another one with regards to the earth. The earth in position of the sun and man as we know it. Think about it. Do you know that the planet Earth, like in Middle Tennessee, we have our seasons. We have the 4 seasons. Aren't they a blessing? But the earth is just the right distance from the sun for human beings to exist on. And you have Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. Go to Mars and guess what? This body would have a hard time living on Mars because it's too cold. Venus, too close to the sun. Physical body has difficulty being in Venus. But we're just right where we are. The tilt of the earth is not straight up and down. The earth is at a 23-degree tilt. It's just right. It doesn't lean too far to one way or to the other. It's just right. As it makes its orbit around planets, around the sun, 365 and 1/4 day. That's why we have leap year, by the way. I think we all know that, but I'm just reminding you, I'm not testing your intelligence. Or I hope that's the way you figure. Excuse me. Sun, or the earth, complete orbit. Chance? I don't think so. God? I think so. Design would also show that we have a water cycle. Rain. We need the rain. I'm thankful for the rain. I don't like too much at one time because then it just kind of runs off it's not good. But reality it is. It's good for what? Streams and lakes, right? Rivers. So we need the rain. And sometimes we need hard rains. The rain cycle. How did it just happen? Now, the evolutionists thought it just happened. It took millions and millions of years. As it took millions of years, there came through time adaptations. Now, there is some truth to that. There are adaptations that are made by animals and other things. But here's the problem with the evolutionist. He can't create enough millions of years. And if you study it long enough and you study it more thoroughly, more than I've ever studied, but if you study it thoroughly, one of the things you find out is that they keep adding more years because they can't fit everything in to their system. So we come back to, well, man, this is wonderfully made. You know, just like the psalmist said in Psalm 139, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works. Well, how does that work? It's your body. Back when we began a couple of weeks ago, the Christian graces, and I talked about faith, might recall. And in that sermon, I talked about we believe that God exists. And I used the argument with regards to the human body and the eye. And I talked about the rods and cones and receptors and how all of that works together. That's medical stuff, and it's far, far above my head. Couldn't, still don't understand it. But what I think is interesting is when you talk about the design of the physical body. Think about this. Here's just a paragraph. This is a book entitled Rock Solid Faith, How to Build It. It's by Bert Thompson, who was a member of the church, but Bert's no longer a member of the church. Anyway, Bert was his credentials, he had a BS in biology from Abilene Christian, and MS and PhD degrees in microbiology from Texas A&M. There's his problem, it's a lot more than that. Anyway, he taught veterinary medicine at Texas A&M there once again. But he was very intelligent. And he wrote this book 2000. So this is an older book. But he talks about, let me just read you this paragraph. He says, human body is composed of over 30 different kinds of cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, nerve cells, etc., totaling approximately 100 trillion cells in an average adult. And if you want all the documentation, he has all the documentation from where he gets this from. These cells come in a variety of sizes and shapes with different functions and life expectancies. For example, some cells are so small that 20,000 would fit inside the capital O from a standard typewriter. Might give you some idea of the age of the argument. Each being about 0.05 millimeters long. In other words, just microscopic. Cells placed end to end would make only 1 inch if 6,000 were assembled together. Yet all the cells of the human body, if set end to end, would encircle the earth over 200 times. Even the largest cells of the human body, the female ovum, is unbelievably small, being only 0.01 of an inch in diameter. Cells have 3 major components. First, each cell is composed of a cell membrane that encloses the organism. Second, inside the cell is 3-dimensional cytoplasm, a watery matrix containing specialized organelles. And third, within the cytoplasm is the nucleus, which contains most of the genetic material, which serves as the control center of the cell. Now, you're not going to remember that. I'm not even, but here's the point. You and I are fearfully and wonderfully made. And this human body is complex. I am glad that there are super intelligent people that can go to medical school and become doctors. Which, by the way, veterinarians are even smarter than doctors, in my opinion. Veterinarians have to learn all the systems of all the animals, whereas your doctor just learned you. So, oh, there you go, Pat. Kudos to your grandson. The intelligence that it takes. I'm always amazed at my doctor. You tell him something and he gives you an answer and it's pretty quick. And he's usually, when I go back and study it, he's pretty well right. He's a pretty smart fellow, smarter than I am. Well, they studied this and they found out, man, this works really wonderful. And of course, in this chapter here, he went on to talk about, I'm not going to get into all of it, but he went on to talk about all the different systems that we have, the 10 different systems, muscular, circulatory, digestive, all those systems and how they all work together. Design. It's a design. I don't understand how I can eat the food that I eat. I can eat the beef, say for a hamburger or for a steak, and I can eat the vegetables that I eat, potatoes and the green beans and corn, and it come out to this. But it does. There had to be a designer behind it. One more argument. And then one more argument. I'll make it very quick. That the apologists make is what's called the moral argument. It's been around for many years as well. And there is difficulty, admittedly, with this belief, this argument. But anyway, the moral argument is simply this. Within each of us, there is a moral integrity. Granted, each one of us, our moral integrity is a little different. We were all trained differently by different people and by different circumstances in life. But it's because each one of us has this, there had to be something behind it. If by chance we all just simply were individuals that evolved from animals, where did this morality come from? Another way of saying it is this. Within each one of us is a moral oughtness. And within this moral oughtness, as the apologist talks about, there comes the idea that why do we believe that it's wrong to murder? Isn't it interesting? Now, we may qualify the idea of murder, the idea of killing. While we may qualify it, it's interesting that just about everybody on the street, especially that's rational, will tell you, and it doesn't matter whether they go to church or don't, will tell you murder's wrong. Oh no, you don't take a life. So the moralist or the apologist says this. He says, where did those morals come from? Well, they came from God. And so I can get into that further. But there is a being, I believe, that's so great that created this world. I like the design argument that we have designed, that every design has a designer. I like the cosmological argument that for every effect there's a cause. Those two make more sense to me than any of the others. But there is a higher being. There's no better idea. And I believe that there is one God, and that one God created all of this. And to him we should be grateful and thankful. Questions, comments, suggestions, thoughts? Wish we hadn't studied it.
Other religions that believe there's only one God as well. But I know there's monotheistic Hindu who believe there's one God. I don't know what there's others, but they also believe there's one God.
Yeah. Well, see, here's the difference. What we've done today is just try to get you to believe there's a God. We haven't tried to get you to understand the God.
No.
So that's really the point. That's an excellent question. The point of today was to get you to understand there's a higher being, God. Then once we make the case next week that this Bible had to come from some being that is far more intelligent and orderly than I and you and all of us, God, then we would make a third case. And that's where I'm really leaning on our third lesson. Probably I haven't decided exactly if that's going to be it or not. But our second lesson will be, okay, this book came from somebody higher. Okay, why do I need to listen to it? And so then that becomes the directive. Most world religions have a hierarchy of deity. They do believe in the highest, but they still have a hierarchy. They have more than one. But yeah, that's a really good question. So here's the point. Walk out this morning and say, had to be somebody. Then we'll develop who the somebody is in the following week. Anything else?
That goes along with what you started the whole discussion with. A lot of people in other religious groups, they don't call themselves religionists. They are spiritualists. There's a difference to them, and there is a difference between being spiritual and being religious.
Yes. Very much so. Very much so. I have toyed with the idea of preaching a sermon on that. But I think you're right. And that's the difference in what's going on in the world today. Anything else?
Last night, I was browsing through the website for the library, trying to pick a book, and I ran across one, and I can't remember the name of it. But the thing was how good it is to believe in. But as I read more, it was that it's good to believe in God or Buddha or anybody else because that enriches your life and makes you a happier human being. And do I want to waste my time trying to figure out what that means?
Yeah, for one thing, that is a true axiom. Second of all, if I want to sell enough books in the marketplace today, I got to include everybody and not just my belief. So that would be the second thing. It is interesting that religion itself does make us all better. And so, you know, there's as the saying goes, the making of books, there is no end. I mean, my sister wrote me a note this past week and said, I want you to write a book on. Yeah, thank you. What time? Where am I going to find the time? But no, she was very encouraging. She really was. And what she was talking about is a possibility one day. Who knows? Anything else? Well, all right. Well, next week, we've got a being. Next week, we're going to find out, did he reveal, is this book, did he reveal? Did it just happen? Let's pray. Our most kind and gracious and loving Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity that we have to study your word and for what it means to us, for the fact that it's a lamp to our feet and light to our path. While we believe in you and we trust in you, we know that many in this world do not. May we be the example, and may we always be at the forefront of being teachers that help others see that God exists, that you exist. We ask that you watch over us now, that you bless us and keep us. Hold us in the hollow of your hand. This is our prayer in Christ's name, amen. My father had a high school education. That's all he had. Very intelligent man, very smart man, elder in the church for many years. Dad taught me design better than any teacher I've ever had. We'd go fishing and he'd talk about the scales on fish, how the fish can go, smoothly through that water. Somebody had to make that. That didn't just happen. I remember that at my dad's knee a lot of times. So sometimes we can be teachers as well, not know all these fancy names for all these arguments. Y'all have a great week. Thank y'all.